presentation. Hello, everyone. My name is Irina Yakoban, and today I'll be the host of another Connect IT Chisinau meetup. I see that we have participants from Europe and even across Atlantic, so welcome. On this beautiful Thursday, our online talk will be focused on patterns of DevOps adoption with an amazing speaker who will examine a few of the common situations that cause DevOps adoption challenges and present some patterns and advice for implementing DevOps successfully in them. Before introducing our speaker, I would like to give you some insights of the platform we are using today. This is Cisco WebEx. In the bottom of the WebEx screen, you can see two important icons. The first one is the chat, and the second one, participants. Take a few seconds to check them out. In the chat section, you can write your questions for our speaker. There you can see a drop down arrow where you can choose to whom to send the message. Please, when you do so, send them to all attendees option so we cannot miss any questions from you. If you click on the second icon, participants, you can see the host and presenter list. However, as attendee, you can see only yourself. Also be aware that all attendees are muted by default in order to avoid multiple background noises. In case you want to ask your question verbally, then send me a message to the host and I will unmute you at the time. And also to make sure that you stay updated with all our online events, please join and follow our Facebook page, which I will send in the chat section a bit later. Now, let me introduce you to our speaker. Eoin Woods, with an extraordinary experience of 30 years in IT, is Chief Technology Officer at Endava, where he guides technical strategy, oversees capability development, and directs investment in emerging technologies. Eoin is a widely published author in both the research and industrial communities, and a regular conference speaker with expertise in software architecture, distributed systems, and computer security. Live from London, please welcome Eoin Woods. Virtual applauses, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. It's very nice to be here, or here being, of course, a bit odd now. Good evening if you're in Chisinau, but I realise we have people from at least as far as Latin America, so I guess it's good morning with you. I wish I was in Chisinau, with those in Chisinau. It's a city I love visiting, but unfortunately we are where we are, so we'll just have to enjoy each other's company by video today.
Yeah, but soon, who knows?
Hopefully soon. I'm looking forward to the day. Today we'll just go through some introductions. Quickly recap the meaning of DevOps. It means many things to many people. We have quite a specific meaning at Endava, which I'll discuss briefly. And then talk really briefly about some of the problems people have implementing DevOps. There are a number of situations we've seen, patterns, I'd call them, where there are specific DevOps challenges, and that's the core of the talk. I'll explain what those are and what we've found to be effective in meeting those challenges. And then, of course, we'll have some conclusions, because I'm Eoin Woods. You pronounce my first name Owen. I realise that's not obvious unless you know me or you're from Ireland. If you got it wrong, don't feel bad. Nearly all of every resident of the United Kingdom gets it wrong as well. It's an Irish name. I've been CTO at Endava since 2015. Great privilege, a job I love. Prior to that, I spent about 15 years building software products for companies in the UK and North America, Silicon Valley. From the sort of early 2000s, I moved into what we call capital markets, so that's banks and fund managers. Those, again, great jobs I enjoy very much. One of the reasons I'm giving this talk is that one of my responsibilities at Endava is that I lead our DevOps at Endava program, which is how we do DevOps at Endava, build our capability in it. So this is a partial reflection of some of our learnings in doing that. And as Irina said, I've written a book and I speak a lot and do all that kind of thing, as many of you do too. I noticed some very familiar names on the call today, so welcome to you all. Endava, for those of you who don't know it, we're a global software delivery business. We do quite a lot of things to do with software delivery and operation. There were about 6,500 of us. I'm sure we're a bit bigger now. And we do most of our delivery from Latin America and Central Europe. And Moldova is one of our very important delivery countries. What is DevOps business then? What is DevOps? And why is it important now? Well, let's start with that. Why is it important now? Some years ago, agility became a thing. We realized we had to move faster as an industry. We had to get better at validation. We had to deliver things earlier and quicker. And so agile working came into its own. And when we were moving faster, we needed to change things regularly. And one of the big problems we had early on in agility was that we could develop the software quickly and have something that in principle we could deploy to production. In reality, it had to go through environments and stages and tests and checks, and it was actually quite a slow process. We actually couldn't get a lot of the benefits of agility. So people at the forefront of the industry, like Google and others, started thinking about, how do I move faster? How do I change a smaller piece? How do I make it less of a risk to put a change in? From this came the rebirth of services. Services have been with us almost since I've been in the industry, but the rebirth of services, particularly microservices and containerization technology, which helps us move individual pieces like services rapidly between different environments. Terrific progress. The problem is that containers and services create a lot of operational complexity. Anyone who's been involved in running in running an operational service with more than a couple of dozen services will know there's a lot of very interesting and intriguing and complicated failure cases. And just updating it safely is complicated in itself. There's a lot of operational complexity. And so the operations teams started realizing that they actually needed to be much more involved in the development. Somewhat reluctantly sometimes, the development teams realized they had to have a lot more to do with operation. Hence along came DevOps, some maybe 10 years ago now. The problem is that when you say DevOps, nearly everyone you talk to has a different meaning for it. If you type DevOps definition into Google, it's just useless. You get dozens of half thought through definitions back. As we say in English, every man and his dog has an opinion on what DevOps means. There are some quite definitive books which people do refer to, but often they're either very general, like the DevOps Handbook, or they're very focused on one aspect of the problem, such as the continuous delivery book. Great books, I recommend you read them all, but they still may not help you quite grasp what it means for you. So in Endava several years ago, we realized we had to define what DevOps was for us. We're not suggesting this is what DevOps is for you, but it is for us, and we found it very successful with our clients. And DevOps is about cross-functional teams who deliver and operate their software, and they do it intentionally as a visible and measurable flow of value. Keep things visible the whole time so people know what's going on, both in the business and technology. And they do it in a continuous and sustainable way. So in other words, we release as often as we can, so that we learn about our software as we can, and we do it in a sustainable way. We're not trying to work like a small startup and burn people out. We need to do this over the long term so that the whole ecosystem is sustainable. And many people in the industry, smarter than us, frankly, have been thinking about this for some time. A couple of years ago now, the CALMS acronym was coined, which I know many of you, all of you probably, have come across before. But just to remind you, we actually believe in this quite strongly. We think the core of DevOps is having a shared culture, automating as much as possible for consistency and efficiency, so that releasing and doing all of the routine tasks around software development is no longer either a chore or risky. Thinking lean, so that we're always doing the most efficient thing possible, taking the small step, learning early. Measure as much as we can, so that we can both analyze it, but also we can accurately reflect reality back to the stakeholders, the people who are paying us. And finally, we believe both sharing transparently with our business, with our clients, and across all of the individual specializations that are involved in delivering and operating software. I don't expect this is news to anyone, but it's worth reminding ourselves to keep coming back to these principles because they really are useful, strong principles. So what are some of the common problems in DevOps adoption? There are myriad problems with DevOps adoption. Just like there are myriad problems adopting almost anything in technology if it's a significant change. I'm sure some of those words are probably things that you recognize from your work, whether it be adopting DevOps or not. But some of the more specific things that we have found specifically problematic with DevOps adoption are people being unclear what the goal is. What does good look like? Why are we doing this? This can be everything from, well, the goal is to implement some tooling, right through to the goal is to become a digital company that releases to market early, understands the value for what it does, and is dynamic in its marketplace and disrupts others. I mean, I've heard everything between those two being described as the goal of the DevOps program. Mismatched expectations between different people involved. Sometimes to the operations staff, they're thinking that it's all about those developers giving us, what we need in a more structured way. Sometimes developers are thinking it's operations people getting out of the way and helping me. Sometimes it's about platform team thinking, actually, this is about empowering us to build platforms for the developers. Sometimes the business think about it as being primarily about allowing them to enter markets faster. There are many, many possible expectations. All of them may be at least partially correct, but unless we bring them together and align people on them, it's very unlikely that this is going to be a good experience during the adoption program. As engineers, we tend, as a sweeping generalization, to be better with facts and technologies than we are with people, feelings, and culture. And so I have been guilty many times, focusing on the technology and the facts, because that's where I feel comfortable and competent, frankly. But we've seen it time and time again with almost any technology transfer. Cultural change is nearly always required and is very important. For DevOps, it's particular because we are trying to undo decades of what is thought of as often best practice. That's a very firm separation of development and operations, and often being goaled in very different ways. Operations being goaled with stability, development being goaled with inevitably needing to. We're trying to change a lot there, and that's going to involve both a change of culture in individuals, in teams, and in the organization as a whole, if we're going to have any real chance of making this successful. There's very often focus on tools. This is sort of related to it, is that DevOps, from our perspective, is more about how we work than the specific tools we use. Yeah, automation is like an important enabler. I wouldn't for a moment suggest that the automation is not important. It's quite difficult to do DevOps without it, though, funnily enough, in the last year, I did actually come across a client who wanted to do a DevOps transformation, and they really hadn't started. When we went through the company, the one team who were the most oriented towards DevOps and kept nodding at us with slight impatience when we tried to explain it to them, slightly patronizingly probably, was the mainframe team, who'd worked together for 20 years on the ZOS mainframe. They were totally integrated, a functional team from idea to operation and right through the operational cycle. They had transparency, they had a shared culture, they had a great deal of measurement, they did a great deal of sharing and analysis. What they didn't actually have was a huge amount of automation from idea to production. Their environment is arguably a bit more challenging to automate. They all accepted that more automation is probably a good thing, but that really made me stop and think and laugh a little that the team that was closest to real DevOps actually arguably had the least automation, but probably used it in the most intelligent way. So it's nothing with the automation is the problem, not having the automation. Mixing together ops teams who feel that they're quite comfortable in their existing environment, which I tend to call a silo because they from everyone else. Teams who often see themselves as digital and agile, who want to do DevOps, is quite a big implementation difficulty. It's actually one that could take its own presentation. It's another pattern that we've seen. It's one I probably don't have time to go into today, but it's definitely quite an interesting one. It's one that's worth thinking about whether that's something you simply have to live with, whether that's something that actually this is the opportunity to help the ops team sort of work across the rest of the organization and share all that insight and expertise that they've got, rather than being quite isolated and keeping it in one place. Another problem with DevOps is how you capitalize on it. We've seen a couple of places where we've tried to do, in fact, we have done some DevOps transformation with them, often based around continuous delivery pipelines and then trying to change the culture, how the delivery is done. What we found is that clients said that they're agile and that they're doing using agile methods or methodologies, if they insist on using that word. Problem is they're not very good at agile. And actually what we find is that they don't have that flow of well-tested, reliable that's valuable because the product owner's been all over it, the product owner's business, that allows them to release value to production regularly. So actually, although they did make quite big steps in their DevOps transformation, I'm not sure that they really got all that much benefit from it because they hadn't got really effective agile working to start with. They hadn't really got the pipeline of value to capitalize on the DevOps working when they integrated their teams and tried to work in a cross-functional way. Of course, it works the other way too, is that if you've got great agile delivery and no DevOps, it's very hard to get agile to production, as we said earlier. The two things are very symbiotic. They work together in a really good way. What we sometimes find in big companies, you'll never find this in a fintech startup, but in really big companies that somebody quite senior, maybe a CIO, says, I really buy this DevOps idea. I can see the value. I think we should all do it. I think we just need to change the organization. So the whole organization together moves towards this DevOps future. I've seen this in a very large UK bank, actually, tried to do this a couple of years ago with a very visionary CIO who I really felt he had all the right ideas. He definitely knew what end state he wanted. He had good ideas how to get there. But of course, he couldn't do it himself. So he set up a change program, a transformation program. The problem is these transformation programs are often staffed by professional transformation and change managers who may or may not know much about DevOps. And the whole thing takes on a life of its own. So like the transformation program almost becomes the end in itself. And one of the problems is they often try and do large change very quickly right across the organization without maybe learning very much about what works and doesn't work. A lot of organizational change managers are very, very skilled at rolling out large-scale change to thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of people. But the changes they do tend to be things that are well understood. A new business process, a new regulatory report regime, a new CRM system, whatever it is. It's all things that you can see the end state pretty obviously, and people who know the organization can look at it and say, that'll be successful, or that won't change that, that's fine. Something as with a much culture change as DevOps has to be done much more incrementally. So we've seen people who just get stuck in a transformation program and they spend all their time worrying about running the transformation program and worrying about DevOps. Not that focusing very much on whether visible transformation steps have been achieved rather than whether they're actually getting value from a new way of working. The other extreme, of course, is also a problem. We get this actually in some of our startup customers who they're sort of doing Agile and DevOps very, very informally. Quite a bit because they're successful. Maybe they make a couple of acquisitions. They've gone from 20 technical staff to 120 technical staff. And they say, we could really do with some help here because most of us are experts and we really just need a bit more structure, is normally the word they use. We need a structure for DevOps. Actually, they don't really want to do it in a systematic way. They want to do it quite opportunistically, and they don't really want to standardize because they start up people who want to be responsive. And that's all fine, as long as you don't expect to end up with a unified way of working in a single culture, single approach across a couple of hundred people. That's really what they're asking for. They're sort of saying, could you come in and do some stuff? And I think, yes, by magic, we'll get the same culture everywhere. If you're going to change culture, if you're going to change the way people work, you need to be intentional about it. So what are these patterns that we've seen before? There's three of them. One of them is what we call the enterprise digital startup. This is typically a new business unit. It's created within a large organization, maybe a big retail firm, or maybe it's a big bank, or maybe it's a big fast-moving consumer goods company. And the reason they're creating it is they've looked at the whole digital space and realized they're a bit behind. They've got good vision, they know what they want to achieve, and they look at their existing organization and say, we're not going to do this very well, or not the way we work today. I mean, we just wouldn't move fast enough, and there's all these complications and barriers and people to talk to. Let's just create a startup. I mean, a startup within us, but let's just create a startup, like a digital group, and just let them get on with it. They typically either implicitly or explicitly goaled with doing Agile and DevOps working from the very beginning. So they're often doing Agile and DevOps in their structure. Complication is they're inside a much, much bigger structure, many times their size, that doesn't probably know much about Agile and DevOps work. The second one is what we call the tools-based implementation pattern. This is where DevOps is primarily seen as a tools implementation exercise. To use that word, that awful phrase, a center of excellence is created. I tend to find that they may be centers, but they're rarely excellent. A center of excellence is created. You buy some tools and implement them through the organization. And the thought is that if you could implement the tool well, people will change their ways of working because they've got a new tool. The culture will change because their ways of working change, and you'll get DevOps. It's an appealing theory. It's one that we've been working in all of our experience with organizations, both actually for agility and for DevOps. So what tends to happen is they buy the automation tools, they start implementing them, but no one's thinking about cultural change. There is a way out of it, though, but again, it's worth being aware of it before you end up there. And the third area is the DevOps team. This is where you've got an organization with a development organization and an ops organization who somebody at the top says, well, you know, we should be doing DevOps. And then they look at their organization and say, but oh, changing all this is going to take ages. I tell you what, couldn't we hire a DevOps team of experts or put them in the middle between dev and ops and they can do the DevOps for us? And that's a surprisingly common approach, especially large organizations have used to try and implement DevOps. So what happens in these different situations? What happens in the enterprise digital startup? Well, firstly, what are its characteristics? Let's understand it. Until we understand it, we're not going to figure out what to do. They tend to be a breakout group. They're given the power, they're empowered, they're given the autonomy to work as a startup, and they're probably creating a new product. It's unlikely they've been created without a very clear goal, but there's a bank, they want to, for example, create the digital applications that a challenger bank would have, and they'll create a unit that says, you're the digital client-facing unit, do what you need to do. You know, hire the product people, hire the software developers, bring in people to the bank, just get it done so that we have really good digital experience. Probably high energy, it's probably a pretty exciting place to work, it's probably trying to move really quickly, but it's a big but, they're still part of the parent organization. Sometimes they forget that, and they typically get to forget that for a couple of months until some senior person arrives to see what they're doing, and they quickly get pushed back into place. They have to be reminded very forcibly, yes, but you're still part of Acme Bank PLC. The reason you exist is to create our digital experience. You have to respect the fact the parent organization's got to come. They're often doing Agile, Dev, and Cloud first. They're probably trying to do all those things because they're trying to move quickly and be modern. Sometimes it's implicit, and sometimes it's actually very explicit. They're probably the trial run for this Agile DevOps Cloud business in a parent organization that knows about it, but is a bit nervous about how quickly it can move. The challenges are they're under immense pressure. They're being given a great deal of flexibility. They've probably promised a lot, quite honestly. A little bit over-promised to get people excited to give them the funding and the autonomy. They've got a real problem with the culture mix because they are, as I mentioned, they're part of this parent organization. So they want to move fast and break things. Well, hopefully not break things, but they want to move fast and they want to be relatively informal. They want to be very flexible. They want to be very dynamic. Parent organization wants to be steady and reliable. Got a brand, got a regulator to deal with. Got a load of existing customers who do know them, even if they're not deeply in love with them. They can't cause problems for them. So they want to be steady and reliable. Those are difficult cultures to mix. They will have dependencies on the parent organization. Whenever we go and see one of these, one of the first things they always tell us is, and then we say, we understand that. Could you just list what you get from your parent organization? You'd be amazed at the length of the lists that they can start off. And often you can see their own faces having a thoughtful expression once they've gone past 2 or 3 things and thinking, actually, we are really. For example, they probably won't be allowed to operate outside the parent security context. They probably rely on some technical services from the parent. Things like maybe the networking group needs to enable them. Yeah, they're on cloud, but they have to be plugged into the parent. So they need the parent's networking group to do some quite complicated network setup. Maybe in fact, very common with digital services, they need to connect to the mainframe to get services from the mainframe, such as use the ledger to get the transactions. They're actually totally dependent on the mainframe API group, who again are sitting in the old world. Maybe the compliant, well, almost certainly the compliance organization wants to know exactly what they're doing, wants to make sure that they're compliant. And they may be dependent on the funding cycle. Yes, they may be autonomous once they've got funding, but actually it may be very hard to change their funding outside an entire funding cycle. And they may also have dual priorities. They may have this build a digital product, do whatever it takes, but there may also be this, you're the guys who are going to prove Agile, DevOps, and cloud for us. And actually, those are not the same goal, and those can be quite hard to balance. So some of the tactics that we've identified useful in this situation are, it sounds obvious, but set clear expectations, because there's a lot of people in the parent organization who will be making a whole lot of assumptions, both good and bad. Because basically the extremes are, this will burn within 6 months, I am going to ignore it. Or the other, this is our savior, they will achieve everything we couldn't do within a year, and then we'll transform the whole organization around them. Neither of those is realistic. It's important that the leaders in this, both technical business leaders and product leaders, are talking to their opposite numbers in the parent, being very realistic about what's possible, but also the benefits, but what's possible. Bridging cultures requires real work. People are going to have to, be talking to other people, bringing them on a bit, making sure that they're sharing cultural conflict early. And also just build practical relationships. If you know you're going to need to integrate into the mainframe, sounds obvious, but people often don't do it. Go and make friends with the mainframe group on your first day, because it's going to take time for them to orient, understand whether you're important, and understand what you need. Another thing is make sure that you're not in a bubble being successful by yourself. The parent organization can just see money flowing and cannot see the benefits flowing out. Make sure that you gather enough information and do some analysis to reflect the benefits of the Agile DevOps cloud working back to the parent organization so that it's seen as money well spent. And you may need a more senior team initially, because there's an awful lot of stakeholder management to do in this situation with people in a big company. Startup maybe just needs excellent technical skills. In this case, you'll probably need people with good technical skills and also some political and communication ability as well. How about this tools-based implementation? You tend to get this in the bigger companies, so this isn't in some startup. This is someone big that says, we're going to list your favorite DevOps tools, doing DevOps. There's normally a recognition that there's a real opportunity. So somebody says, if we did cloud, if we were on the cloud using containers, using infrastructure as code, say we used Azure DevOps, we could just work in a completely different way to the way we work today. That's probably true. Enthusiasts jump on it, and they, but maybe even in their own time, using their own cloud accounts, they show the potential. Like they show that all this could be done. Create some kind of POC, almost certainly totally isolated, and almost certainly totally different to the way the organization works today. And then the organization buys in. Senior technical guys, they're smart. I mean, they can see the benefit. They can see the opportunity here. They buy in. They invest significantly in buying technology, training people, writing, setting up centers of excellence, creating GitHub repos full of examples, all that stuff. But nobody actually stops to think, how's anyone actually going to use it, given how they work today? That thought hardly ever crosses anybody's mind. It's implicit. They use the tools, everything will change. It'll be fine. In reality, the organization will continue to work in the way it does today with the silos. You'll have a dev silo, or maybe you've even got a product silo, a dev silo, an architecture silo, security silo, a release management silo, an ops silo. I mean, all these groups will continue to be in the state they are today. Some of them may use the tooling, others may not. They probably don't share all that much across, and they've already got quite formalized handoff points, and there's probably not a lot of cultural change going on. So unfortunately, although some people in sort of maybe dev and architecture and maybe release management or dev and architecture security have got really quite advanced now, and they could in principle get to production much faster, all the other bits have been largely untouched because they don't use the tool. They have no need to use the tool. They have no, from that perspective, they don't even need to. Nothing really changes, and so nothing really gets to production any faster. You can even get hostility. It's, what are you doing with these, digital toys? We've got our release to production cycle later. I don't know why you're wasting your time with it. I mean, that becomes a fear thing. this doesn't look as if it includes me very much, I think we'll just quash this as quickly as we can. So some of the tactics we've found to be useful is illustrate where the problems are in a non-threatening way, such as a value stream. And he's looking from idea to operation. What are the steps? How long does each one take? What is the waste involved? The organisation can then maybe look at itself more honestly based on facts rather than opinions and emotion. Perhaps build one cross-functional team in one small place. That's not a POC. That's actually trying to do something real. Maybe you'll have to pick a low risk thing, but maybe pick an internal system rather than a client-facing system. Just build one team to show how the technology can enable a cross-functional team to break down the silos and the value streams, show the difference between the value streams. Just one sort of full experiment might convince enough senior people that it's worth going further and starting to think about their ways of working. Communicate actively. Make sure that people know what these tools are doing and what you're trying to achieve. The fact that actually implementing the tools, not the point, is getting to DevOps ways of working. And also measure it. If the tool isn't actually returning great results quickly, that should be obviously your measurements. Nobody hates anything more than an evangelistic enthusiast who's overstating the benefits. Particularly the existing groups will almost certainly try and discredit it if that happens. And then hopefully use the value stream or organizational mapping or whatever to show people how things could be different. Our third pattern is the DevOps team, or as I call it, the dreaded DevOps team. What happens here is there is an organizational desire to do DevOps. Some quite senior people, and maybe some technical people, and maybe some quite junior people will go, it'd be really good if we could work in a DevOps way. We've read the book, we've seen the videos, we've been to the conferences, we've kind of got we get the point. That's the benefit. Then they look at their organization and go, oh, that looks very risky, and what they do, we change everyone to work in cross-functional teams. And this says, somebody senior normally says, just have a DevOps team. After all, we've got a security team, entirely missing the point that having a separate security team is part of the problem. They go, can we drop in a DevOps team? Because they can sit between dev and ops. They can help the developers and help ops. And then we DevOps. And everyone points to the DevOps team and says, right, well, it's all their problem now. Good, they're going to do DevOps for us. So what do you think actually happens? Of course, the DevOps team is probably hired from a combination of internal enthusiasts and outside consultants or experts or whoever. And they're pretty knowledgeable about DevOps, actually. They've been thinking about it for a while. Maybe they've done it somewhere else. You know, they know what to do. That's fine, but nobody outside that team has any clue what DevOps is actually about. They've probably not even read a book on it. And if they've read a book, they've not really thought about what it means for them. So you get almost no cultural change outside the DevOps team, actually. The rest of the organization doesn't really change their way of working. Their culture is not changing, so why should I, think about you every day as opposed to at the end of the release? All we've ended up with is a new silo. So we used to have dev, sec, and ops, and now we've got DevOps, sec, ops. It's actually not going to help tremendously unless they work in a totally different way. Could even reduce the delivery speed, ironically, if the DevOps team accidentally kind of get in the way. The team are also often, I've observed, set up to fail. No one honestly wants them to fail, but they're set in such a situation that it's very unlikely they can be successful. Because, for example, the head of ops is actually quite hostile. He doesn't really care what they do. He's going to protect it as he or she sees. She says, this is my team, and I'm protecting them from the DevOps business. The team is set up to fail. They're never going to get flow to production. So the tactics that we could use here, we've found the key thing is you need to pivot the way the team is seen and perceives itself into being an enabler team. They're not there to do DevOps. They're there to infect the organization with DevOps and make sure it spreads. So they work in and with the dev team, in and with the ops team, helping to break down the silos, helping to get individuals in those teams working together, helping to show people what DevOps looks like. You've got to make sure that you've got a range of skills in the team. Often DevOps teams initially are staffed by technical experts. Well, of course you need them. It'll be a disaster otherwise. However, if that's all you've got, they probably don't have the right skill mix unless you've got unicorns to do everything else needed. You'll need to have ways of working with people as well. If you like DevOps coaches, to give them a formal name, they've got to have to be good communicators, good mentors, as well as having expertise in the team. And this team needs to lead and teach by doing. They can't be the sort of arm's length consultants you get so often in the agile world. The ones that I seemingly jokingly say, they come in, they tell you how to move your post-it notes around, and then they vanish, leaving you completely bewildered as to how you actually make this work in practice. This team has to be everywhere, on the ground, solving problems, showing people the right way, having hard conversations, going to talk to really senior managers about why maybe part of the problem, though no one really wants to say it. And the DevOps team really has to be quite brave, but also they have to see themselves as running around the organization, working right across the different groups, not be a group themselves. They're enabling other groups, and they should not aim to be between any other two groups. They're about bringing these groups together, not about adding another sort of brick in the wall in between, if you like. Again, they need to be very honest about what they're achieving. They need to be highlighting limitations, highlighting when they're failing, because that's going to, one, build trust, and two, help people to help them. So in conclusion, the DevOps era is here, and it's here for a good reason. The change in our environment from realizing that agility is not enough has led us to invent some really cool and very powerful technology. But that technology means that we need a partnership between people who are primarily to bring the two together, and that's what is done in DevOps. And we think it's embodied by cross-functional teams working together with a mix of skills in the teams. So the teams, self-contained and empowered. People who deliver and operate. You get no one in the team who's disinterested in operation, and no one in the team who's disinterested in development. You just get people who know different amounts. You achieve a flow of value. That's what everyone's focused on. It's a single goal, flow of value to production. If you ask anyone in the team, it should be, we're here to get the following high priority features into production such that they're delivering value. And it needs to be continuous and sustainable and not a death march, frankly. It's quite complicated to do. There's quite a lot of different complications. Some of them are completely to do with people. Some of them actually can be technical. Some of them can be to do with simple organizational structure. Some of them can be to do with simply making sure that everyone has talked to each other and everyone has made sure that understand what they're trying to achieve together and why it's important. But all of these things together tend to create an unspoken but rather difficult and complicated situation where no one's about the problems, everyone's pretending they're not there, and then the whole DevOps program will grind to a halt with very little value, having spent quite a lot of money and everyone being very disappointed. However, we do see some patterns. These are not the only three patterns. In fact, I've alluded to some others, such as work with an ITIL-based operations organization when you're trying to be a digital delivery unit. That's another one, which that's a different pattern. Three patterns that we've seen repeatedly are startups, digital startups inside enterprises, fast-moving small organizations, but who are attached to large, quite slow-moving organizations, and there has to be cooperation between the two. Tools-based implementations, where some senior managers have talked to, I don't know, some tools vendors, I guess, or maybe some industry analysts, and they think it's all about buying some sophisticated AI-based technology, no doubt, pipelines or platforms or PaaSes or deployment tools or cloud managers or whatever it is that they've been sold, or even all of it, typically. But actually, all they're thinking about is, how do I get tools implemented in teams? There's an inevitable silo in the middle called the center of excellence. The only people who really understand the tools, and even they're not thinking about it on the teams. So the teams try and implement them. It doesn't really fit very well with the way they work, and they don't get a lot of benefit in the way they work. Being everyone after a year or two goes, that was been a waste. Let's pick another tool. And finally, the dreaded DevOps team. The curse of the talented, as our former VP of DevOps, Ed Buckley, used to call them. A group of people who are highly capable and probably absolutely capable of implementing DevOps in an organization, dropped into an organizational context where they form another silo, and they find it very difficult to actually enable DevOps. But as we've seen, although every situation is unique, we see these patterns coming out repeatedly, and actually we find the challenges, although, yes, unique to this particular organization, the challenges are pretty predictable across the three. And so actually this means there are useful repeatable tactics. Lines sort of, clearly there are more, and we could spend several days talking about this, but you experienced people. I'm sure those were quite familiar, but those are the tactics to be thinking about. How do I apply them in my situation? For your DevOps journey, I don't know where you are. Maybe you're Netflix. Maybe you're DevOps already, or maybe you're just in existing effective agile environment with quite traditional operations. You're thinking, where do we start? Starting is working out who the people, why you're doing it. So who are the stakeholders, why they care, and what your goals are. Working out what's unique about your characteristics of your environment are. What makes it easy and what will make it hard. And that will allow you to work out what are my adoption challenges, because they won't be the same as the next organizations or maybe even the next teams if you're doing it on a sort of group basis. But once you understand your challenges, you can go out and look for some adoption tactics that will help you meet those challenges, which I've outlined a few tonight. And I'm sure many people on this call or that they can share as well. It's worth keep going back to is remember CALM's principles. They're a bit of a cliche because people refer to them so often, but actually, if you think about it, they really are where you need to focus. If you've got the culture right, if you've automated intelligently and appropriately, if you've got lean working so that you're constantly doing the simplest thing possible and doing it in a way that's efficient and finding feedback, if you're measuring things so that you know what's going on, and if you're sharing between all the people, those are all very powerful enablements for getting working effectively in your organization. So that's what I had. Thank you very much. Now I'd be very happy to take some questions if you've got some questions.
Thank you for this comprehensive and insightful presentation. Now let's see if we have any questions. If you didn't manage to drop your questions in the chat section, please do it now so we can cover everything. All right. So far, it's a bit silent. All right, here we have a presentation, a question from Alexandru. Did you consider the implementation of sec layer, Devsecops, to incorporate security at speed and develop a secure code mentality across Endava?
Yes, absolutely. So Devsecops is actually part of our DevOps approach at Endava, which we're just starting to kind of roll out seriously. We've done DevSecops work as in delivery and consultancy with some clients. I didn't talk about it tonight because I think it's an added complication, because I think the security team, I mean, I am a sort of security engineer myself, so I'm aware of the challenge. I used to be not very DevOps myself when I was in security. Yes, we're aware of it. I think it adds an added complication. On the other hand, you're absolutely correct to point out the fact that the reason people have started thinking about DevSecops is if you just don't solve the Dev and Ops interaction problem, you end up with another silo that's sitting there, potentially block progress. You do have to integrate security into the process at some point. Arguably, maybe not on day one. Difficult enough to it can be difficult enough to get Dev and Ops working together, but they do need to be part of the process.
All right, thank you. Here we have one more question from Bogdan. He asks, what can be done in this context in Endava? How can we improve it?
So Bogdan is one of our leading DevOps practitioners. Can you chat a little bit more to say what can be done about what specifically? Do you mean DevOps or DevSecops or one of the patterns?
Yeah, can you, Bogdan, relate to what do you mean exactly? Okay, we're just gonna wait for him to answer. From Dennis, a question: what is the main difference between a DevOps team and project management team?
That's a good question. I mean, the main difference is that the DevOps team, if you have one, don't do any project management. Which probably sounds a bit facetious, but I'm not sure entirely understand the question. But so the DevOps team do two, if you have one, do two things. One, they lead the technical implementation effort needed to enable DevOps, and the second thing is they act as DevOps coaches really across all of the different teams who are involved to get them working in a cross-functional way. They often can't change the org structure, and this is the challenge. I mean, we've had this problem at banks. You can't actually change the org structure. But that's not to say you can't get people from the different parts of the org working together in a cross-functional way. That's what the DevOps team are there to kind of point out to people. They kind of pull people together into one meeting and go, right, we have to do this together rather than you doing it and handing it to you. So let's do it together now. So they're not actually doing any project management as such, although they probably have a relationship with the project management team, which may or may not be good.
Thank you. A few questions collected in our chat. So another question from, I'm not sure how to pronounce the name. I'm just going to take a guess. Jairo, I think. Yeah, he said, I agree with the patterns you've exposed, but most companies are still staffing for a DevOps engineer. What do you think needs to happen for us to evolve so that the role is not needed? And what do you think those practitioners should be moving to?
Yeah, so that's a really good point, Jairo. Yes, as a DevOps engineer, I'm sure that is high in your thoughts. I don't actually think we would remove in any way the people. Which I wouldn't remove the people. We wouldn't remove the role that we currently call DevOps engineer. It's just that, as Ed Butler always pointed out, it was a bit of a curse because it means so many things to so many people. You know, we're almost setting people up for failure in some cases. I think we need to find a better name for the DevOps engineers. And I think the point is that nearly all of our DevOps engineers are automation experts. I'm not quite sure what to call that person. Pete Reed suggested that maybe they were called pipeline engineers or platform engineers, or somebody else suggested systems engineers. So it's a very high degree of technical expertise in the automation required for infrastructure as code, automation, pipelines, all of that. How we get there is, I don't think the role goes away. As I say, I think it gets renamed. There's still a specialization. But currently, the problem we have in many teams, which I've observed, is that partly caused by the job title, people just assume that this one magical person will solve all of their DevOps problems. And, you know, we don't do that with the other disciplines. We don't expect, or we shouldn't expect, our testers to do all the testing. The testers are there to enable the team to do testing. I think it'd be the same with DevOps automation engineers. They're there to enable the team to do their automation. But to get there, we need higher, arguably much higher, degree of general capability across the firm in automation skills, which currently we don't have that many people who are expert at it. So we do tend to get this concentration in a small number of people. But that's the plan, if you like, as to how we do it. It's the same as we plan for security. It's the same we did for Agile. Make sure that everyone feels that they're part of that skill set.
Great, thank you. Another question from Dayan. Which of the 5 pillars of comms, according to you, is most hard to achieve? I would say culture, but I want to hear your opinion.
That's a great question. Yes. Yeah, I think culture is probably the most important and probably the most difficult, because some of automation, at least for companies like Endava, is arguably the easiest, because automation is sort of in our blood, as we say in English. It's something we do naturally. I don't think people find lean thinking very difficult once they do it intentionally. I think measurement, again, not the hardest. Actually, people need to be reminded a lot about measurement, but it's not difficult as such. It's just it needs to be thought about more. The other one that it can be difficult is sharing, but I think sharing and culture are very closely related. So I think if you get the cultural change right, people will share. I agree with you. I think it's culture.
Lovely. So we got an answer to the previous question where Bogdan
Thank you, Bogdan.
gave us some more details. So I'm asking in the context of this presentation, where we in Endava have people called DevOps Engineer and risk to create another layer, another silo. Silo?
Silo, yeah.
Yeah, even I think is not a risk always. Is
It's about how the
about
team
how the
works.
team project works. Yeah.
You're totally right, Bogdan. I mean, you're one of our people who really knows how to do this. I mean, you're quite right. The DevOps team need not be a silo. In fact, Ed Butler, Alex Cross, and many others. I can't pull all the names out of my head, but they've been in DevOps teams that have been what we call enabler teams. I mean, that's the way I think you work a lot, isn't it? Sort of what I was talking about. It's pivoting it from being a silo to being an enabler. And actually, there's nothing wrong with having a team of people who are the center of expertise and are helping all the other groups get their DevOps work done. It's just that when we've gone into quite a few clients, especially alongside Bain, what we found is that they've got a DevOps team, and that it tends to be one of these two anti-patterns. One, they're just tools guys, just helping people implement it. Or they've been plopped in between dev and ops, take all the responsibility of making the flow work, which doesn't work either because dev and ops don't really cooperate. They just expect them to work a miracle. It's your kind of DevOps team where you're enabling dev and ops to work together through AM. I mean, that can work really well.
All right. I think we'll have two more questions, if that's all right with you.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. A question from Alexei. How well do DevOps teams follow the Agile?
How well do DevOps teams follow Agile? That's a good question. I think effective DevOps teams are actually kind of work in a lean way, strictly rather than Agile way, but they're very, how would you put it, sympathetic and well integrated into the Agile delivery. I think not every person currently labeled as a DevOps engineer is necessarily all that great at agility, but if you've got effective DevOps working at one end, then you'll have effective Agile at the other, and the two come together. So they, as I say, because they're dealing with the flow to production and dealing with production incidents, I think they'll probably be running in a kind of lean Kanban kind of way. But they will be working in harmony with kind of effective Agile delivery organization.
Thank you. And last
We have an
question.
earlier question from Alex.
Yeah, I see from Alexandra. We have more questions about Devsecops. But I think we'll stick to the last one. I think it's more general, not Endava inside, what's happening inside. So what have your first priorities been when preparing the transition strategy of the teams to DevSecOps ops culture? Yeah.
The initial priorities are to work out what our answer at Endava is for DevOps for our teams. We don't have a good answer for that today. I mean, lots of teams are not. Some teams are doing really good DevOps work with clients, but it's worked on a sort of team by team basis. I've said this I think a number of times. The level we are with DevOps from Agile 5 years ago. 5 years ago, we had people who could operate in Scrum teams pretty well, but as soon as it came to collecting a number of Scrum teams together or doing something bigger like a WorldPay, it was done on a account by account basis. Just people feeling their way forward, doing the best that they could. And we're sort of there with DevOps. We have teams who are doing DevOps. We have done DevOps consultancy. We've helped clients move from more waterfall ways to Agile with DevOps. We have done that, but we do it on an account by account basis. So step one is, which we're doing right now, is to work out what we think DevOps looks like, and the DevOps working group is doing that. Two then is to talk to all the different teams and experts we've got across Endava who've all got an opinion, and then come to a consensus as to whether we need to change that. We may well need to change that. We may have things wrong. We'll change that. And then we'll be going to look for pilot accounts that will use our approach. So if you like, the WorldPay for DevOps. So ideally, the sort of digital projects where we have quite a lot of ownership from sort of idea to production, and we can use all of our ideas and prove them out. And then, once we've proved them out and refined it a bit, then we'll be looking to do a kind of DevOps at Endava capability program. Probably aware of we have a growing agility program, lots of organizations have those. We'd be doing a similar thing for DevOps to empower teams to use our approach to DevOps and feed back into it as well. Tell us what works and doesn't work. And for example, identify more patterns so that we can add more patterns to our catalog.
All right, I think we don't have any more extra questions. I want to thank you all for taking your time, for preparing this amazing presentation and delivering it today. And also big thank you for all the participants for interesting and challenging questions. We got a lot of nice messages from everybody here. We don't know when we're going to have the next event online, but I hope it's going to be very soon. Anyway, we will announce it on our Facebook Connect IT Chisinau page. If you want, you can follow and see what's happening in there. Thank you again, Eoin, and I hope to see you next time in Chisinau for a big presentation on a big stage with hundreds and hundreds of people in there.
I look forward to it. Thank you all for attending today, and thanks for the great questions. It was good to talk to you.
Okay, bye-bye to everyone, and have a lovely evening or day.
Bye-bye.